Good evening and welcome back to 31 Horror Nights. It's October 16th and tonight's movie is We Are Still Here. That is a great name for a haunted house movie. Short, sweet, and to the point. I kind of wonder how I hadn't found this movie before this Horror Nights because I've been at this since 2017 and this is a movie from 2015 that was like an independently made American haunted house movie and it got some really positive reception. This might have come up at some point, but if it did, I don't remember it. One kind of striking thing about this movie, at least from its trailer, is its aesthetic. Normally, haunted house movies don't try to invoke any sort of season, but if they do, it's almost always autumn, with things like wind and rain. This is definitely a winter movie. And winter also has a lot of good aesthetic for horror. Obviously, the contrast between red and white is used a lot in horror movies. This director had been doing a lot of work for writing behind the scenes, but this is his feature film directorial debut. And this director is named Ted Geoghegan. That's what I'm going for. It's like that meme about how every C in Pacific Ocean is pronounced differently. It's like every G in this man's last name could be pronounced differently. I don't know. But whatever this man's name is, if this movie is really good, he's made two more that were received similarly well. So maybe there will be a new regular in Horror Nights. Who knows? I'm going to go check it out. I am a little torn. I think I'm going to give We Are Still Here a 7 out of 10. Because on one hand, it knows how to do horror better than most Hollywood horror movies. But on the other hand, a lot of the other things about it are not polished, I think is the best way to describe it. While the effects are kind of hit or miss, the ghosts in this movie look great. One of the themes that they have is that even though this is like a New England place and it's obviously winter, there is a basement of the house that is always very hot. And the overall themes of all the supernatural things in this movie revolve around the idea of fire. The ghosts in the film are like charred black from head to toe, but they have like completely whited out eyes, so that's a good amount of contrast. And it's not just like black paint, it's like an actual texture to it. It looks great. And one thing that they never really mentioned, but I could tell just by the way that they showed it, is that one thing they kept focusing on in the basement is this hole in the wall that sort of like goes back a bit. And that really reminds me of a part of a crematorium, the place where you shove the body in so that it gets burned. And I got to that conclusion because the Dagmar family that originally owned this house when it was first built used it as a funeral home. One thing that this movie does is something that a lot of horror movies do. Even if you're not like doing a camera POV type of thing, thing that filmmakers will do often is that they will use handheld shots that look like they're from the point of view of someone or something eavesdropping on the characters. Like it will be peering around a corner or something. And this, combined with the supernatural nature of what's going on in this house, really makes you feel like these characters are never truly alone. The horror aspect of this movie is executed wonderfully. It's like the other like movie parts of it that I found a little bit wanting. One thing that I feel like a lot of people don't really put together in their heads is that most of the time, when you see what you think of as bad acting in a movie, that's probably more of a sign of bad directing in the movie. Because the actor does not really know like the full vision of the movie the way that the director is supposed to. So if a director gives them bad direction or no direction, they'll just kind of do what they think is right in the moment, and that might not fit into the rest of the movie. This is usually how you get bad performances from otherwise good actors. It's someone who can act either not being given any direction or being given very strange direction that they have no choice but to just trust the director and follow. The most prominent example of that in this movie is one of the two leads, Anne, played by Barbara Crampton. And by the time this movie was in production, she had been acting for like 30 years. So I don't think that she was the issue here. When you listen to the way that she talks, it feels very much like I'm reading out loud my lines. And I would almost think that if everybody talked like that, this was meant to sort of be an homage to older horror movies because the film takes place in 1979, or maybe even meant to emulate like a B movie or something. But that's not consistent. There are a few characters who do that, but other ones talk a lot more naturally than that. And this isn't to blast this actress or this director, because it's not really that big of a deal in this movie. It is just something that kept coming up and overall contributed to the feeling of a lot of this movie not feeling polished as compared to the horror elements, which are expertly crafted. If the movie was paced differently so that it had a long time to sort of set things up, I think it actually would have been a lot more noticeable and affected the movie negatively more than it did. But basically, from the beginning, they go right into the horror. So it's not really that bad of a thing. Now that I'm talking about that, the idea of a movie that feels like a B movie in terms of the acting and the directing and the writing, but the horror is done wonderfully, that actually sounds like it would be kind of interesting. But that's not really what this movie is. It's a mostly good movie that also feels really uneven. But the good parts of it do shine through enough so that overall this movie was an enjoyable experience. And now I want to talk about a few of the spoilers. One way in which this movie really didn't feel like the standard Hollywood haunted house fare is normally the idea is family goes to new house and things in new house are bad, conflict ensues. And that does happen in this movie, but that's not the whole story. As the movie keeps going, you realize that it's not just this house, it's the whole town. But the house and the town are not on the same side. There is some dark supernatural force that is tied to this location that demands sacrifices every 30 years, I believe they said in this movie. And the town wants to give those sacrifices so that they're not consumed by whatever force is beneath this house. But the house itself is not one unified front either, because those black and burn ghosts that we see is representative of the first family sacrificed to the house, the Dagmar family. And they absolutely do attack the main characters and the other townspeople when they come to the house. But when they have killed all the townspeople that came, especially Dave, who was the leader of all of them, they make no move to attack the couple that had moved into the house, Paul and Anne. But in addition to that, throughout the entire movie, they kept hearing the voice of their son who had recently died. And it makes no logical sense why the spirit of their deceased son would be in this house he had never been to before. There is no reason to believe that is the case. In fact, they are warned by one of their friends who has psychic connections that it's something else pretending to be their son. So at the very end, when Paul and Anne are, by all intents and purposes, home free, they can just walk out. Anne hears the voice of her deceased son and goes down into the basement. And the last part of the movie is Paul following, looking down the basement. We don't know what he's looking at and saying, "Hey, Bobby," which is the name of their son. I think that there are different levels to what's going on in this scenario. You got the Dagman family, who are these vengeful spirits that haunt the house, but are mostly interested in hurting the townspeople. You have the townspeople who just want to feed sacrifices to this dark force beneath the house. And then you have that house itself, who just wants its pound of flesh every 30 years and doesn't care where it gets it from. This nuance to the writing, as well as how well the horror is done, is what makes me want to give some of the more rocky parts of this movie a pass, because there clearly was a lot of talent here. I probably will look at some of this director's later movies. I keep saying this director because I don't want to embarrass myself by trying to pronounce that name. Ted G. Let's just call him Ted G. I am interested in the other Ted G movies, and maybe I will check it out in future horror nights. But until then, this movie at least was good. Thank you for listening. I'll see you tomorrow.